Before we begin, remember that this story is meant only for rest and relaxation. Nothing here requires your attention, nothing important will happen, and there is no need to stay awake. You can simply let the words pass by gently, like distant sounds in the night as you slowly drift into sleep. In the medieval world, when the sun finally slipped below the horizon, life did not end suddenly. Instead, it softened. Shadows stretched slowly across narrow stone streets. Wooden doors were closed with familiar hands, and the noise of the day faded into something quieter, slower, and far less demanding. There were no bright screens, no endless notifications, and no reason to rush anywhere once darkness arrived. Night was not something to fight against. It was something expected, something prepared for, and something accepted. In a medieval city, nightfall began with a gentle routine that almost everyone followed without thinking too much about it. As the sky darkened, shopkeepers put away their goods. Simple wooden shutters were pulled closed. Lamps made of oil or tallow were lit one by one, casting warm, uneven light onto walls that had seen generations come and go. The streets never became completely dark, but they were never bright either. Light existed only where it was needed and nowhere else. Most people returned to their homes early. Homes were small by modern standards, but they felt full of warmth and familiarity. Beds were often shared, not out of necessity alone, but out of habit. Sleep was something communal, something normal, something uncomplicated. Outside, the air cooled gradually. Stone walls released the heat they had collected during the day. A faint smell of wood smoke lingered as hearth fires were allowed to burn low. And while most of the city prepared to sleep, a very small group of people prepared to stay awake. They were the night watch. The medieval night watch did not rush. They were not soldiers marching into battle. They were ordinary men, sometimes older, sometimes tired, often paid very little, whose job was simply to be present while others slept. Their task was simple: walk slowly, listen carefully, notice anything unusual. They carried lanterns that swayed gently with each step. The soft glow moved across cobblestones, briefly lighting doorways, barrels, and empty market stalls. Their footsteps were unhurried. There was no reason to walk fast. Nothing ever happened quickly at night. The watchmen often followed the same routes, night after night, year after year. Their bodies learned the paths without conscious effort. They knew where the stones dipped slightly, where puddles collected after rain, where cats liked to sleep. Silence was not complete. It never was. There were always small sounds. A distant cough from an open window, the creak of wood settling as buildings cooled, the soft clatter of a loose shutter moving in the breeze. Sometimes a dog barked, then stopped, satisfied that nothing was wrong. The watchman did not react to every sound. Most noises were familiar, most were harmless. They knew the difference between normal night sounds and something that deserved attention, and that knowledge allowed them to remain calm. As they walked, they often hummed quietly to themselves, not loudly, just enough to stay awake. Songs passed down over years with verses added and forgotten. No one listened, no one needed to. Above them the sky stretched wide and dark. Stars appeared slowly one by one as eyes adjusted to the lack of light. Without modern lights, the night sky felt closer, heavier, more present. People believed the stars mattered deeply. They marked seasons, guided travelers, and reminded everyone that the world was larger than any single city. Inside homes, sleep arrived in layers. First, the day's thoughts faded. Concerns about work, food, or weather softened. Then the body relaxed, limbs growing heavy beneath wool blankets. Beds were simple, straw-filled mattresses covered with linen. They were not especially soft, but they were familiar. Familiarity mattered more than comfort. Children fell asleep quickly. Adults followed more slowly. In many homes, someone remained half awake for a while, listening to the sounds of the city settling. Knowing that the watch was outside made sleep easier. That knowledge created a sense of safety that did not require explanation. The night watch continued their slow circuit. At certain hours, they stopped and called out the time, not with urgency, but with rhythm. It is midnight, and all is well. The words echoed softly, bouncing off stone walls, drifting upward to open windows. People heard it in their sleep, not fully waking, but feeling reassured. All is well. Those words carried weight. The watchman believed them too. Hours passed without event. A lantern was refilled with oil. A cloak was pulled tighter against the cold. A brief pause was taken in a sheltered doorway. The pace never changed. Time at night moved differently. There was no pressure to measure it precisely, only a gentle awareness of passing hours. In the distance, a church bell marked time in a slow, steady way. Its sound rolled across rooftops and faded into the dark. Rats scurried near refuse piles, unseen and uninterested in humans. Cats watched silently from ledges, eyes catching lantern light for just a moment. Every city had its own night rhythm. Some were quieter, some slightly louder, but all shared the same softness that came with darkness. As the night deepened, even the watchmen felt the pull of sleep. Their steps slowed just a little more. Their thoughts wandered. They thought of warm bread, of home, of the simple comfort waiting at dawn, but dawn was still far away. And that was fine. Nothing needed to be rushed. Somewhere, a candle burned low beside a bed. Someone turned over, sighed, and slept more deeply. The city rested as a single body, breathing slowly, steadily. And the night watch continued, lanterns glowing softly, holding the quiet together until morning. Long before the sun even thought about rising, the medieval city was already breathing softly in the dark. Most people were still deeply asleep. Their homes were quiet. Their fires had burned low. Dreams moved slowly through tired minds. But in a few quiet corners of the city, faint movement had already begun. This was the hour of the bakers. Medieval bakers did not wake with daylight. They woke before it, often when the sky was still completely dark and the stars were only just beginning to fade. There were no alarms, no sudden sounds to pull them from sleep. They woke because their bodies were used to it. Habit was stronger than any clock. A baker would rise slowly from bed, careful not to wake others. A cloak was pulled on, shoes were slipped over tired feet. The air inside the home was cool. Outside, it was cooler still. The street was almost silent as the baker stepped out. Only the soft sound of a door closing disturbed the night. Lantern light guided the way, small and steady. The baker did not hurry. There was time. The bakery itself was simple, stone walls, a large oven that dominated the space. Wood stacked carefully nearby. The first task was always the fire. Wood was arranged slowly, thoughtfully. A spark caught. Flames grew quietly, warming the cold room. The oven needed time to heat. Nothing could be rushed. While the fire settled, dough prepared the night before waited patiently. It had risen slowly, just like everything else in the medieval world. The baker's hands moved without thought. They had done this thousands of times before. Flour dusted the table. Dough was shaped gently, not forced. Each loaf was similar, but never exactly the same. There was comfort in repetition. Outside, the city remained asleep. The night watch made their final rounds, lanterns dimmer now. They nodded to the baker if paths crossed. No words were needed. Everyone understood their role. As the oven warmed, the smell of bread slowly began to fill the air. Warm, familiar, reassuring. That smell drifted through narrow streets, slipping into cracks beneath doors, brushing against sleeping minds. People would not fully wake yet, but something inside them noticed. Morning was coming. Inside homes, sleep shifted, dreams lightened, breathing changed. The baker placed the first loaves into the oven. The heat embraced them evenly. Time passed quietly. There was no rush to fill shelves, only a steady rhythm of baking, waiting and listening. The crackle of fire was soft, almost hypnotic. The baker sometimes sat nearby, eyes half closed, resting while working. Fatigue was accepted, not fought. Outside, the sky began to change, not suddenly, not dramatically, just a faint softening at the edges of darkness. The deepest blue slowly gave way to something lighter. Birds began to stir. One call, then another. The city was still mostly asleep, but it was no longer completely still. As loaves finished baking, they were set aside to cool. Steam rose gently, then disappeared. Each loaf represented a small certainty in a world full of unknowns. Bread would be available today. That knowledge mattered. Soon, other early risers appeared, milk carriers, water drawers, market workers. They moved quietly, respectfully, as if not to disturb the city's final moments of rest. The baker opened the shop window just a little. Warm air escaped, carrying the scent of fresh bread farther into the streets. Inside nearby homes, people turned in their sleep, comforted without knowing why. The church bell rang softly in the distance, marking an early hour. The baker listened, nodded, and continued working. Morning was not an event, it was a gradual unfolding. As lights slowly touched rooftops, the city prepared itself. Shutters opened partway, doors creaked, footsteps increased, still unhurried. Bread was placed on wooden shelves, simple loaves, nothing fancy. They did not need decoration, they were enough. The baker wiped flour from their hands, stretched tired shoulders, and took a slow breath. Another night completed, another morning ready. The rhythm continued, day after day, year after year. And somewhere nearby, someone slept a little longer, comforted by the quiet certainty that bread would be waiting when they woke. In the medieval world, water shaped the pace of life, not quickly, not loudly, but patiently. Before the streets filled with voices, before the markets opened, before the sun climbed high, people came quietly to the wells. Every village had at least one, some had two. Larger towns had many. They were simple places, a stone circle, a wooden beam, a rope worn smooth by years of hands, pulling it up and down. The well did not change much over time. It stayed where it was, doing the same job every day. At dawn, the air around the well was cool. The ground still held the night's chill. Mist sometimes hovered low, barely moving. The first person to arrive often came alone. A woman with a bucket, a servant sent early, an elderly villager who preferred quiet hours. Footsteps were slow. There was no need to hurry. The bucket was lowered carefully. The rope slid softly against stone. Down into darkness it went. The sound of water was faint at first, then clearer. The bucket dipped beneath the surface. A gentle pull began, not fast, not strained, just steady. Water rose from the deep, unchanged by time or weather. Cold, clear, reliable. The bucket reached the top and was lifted aside. A pause followed. No one rushed to leave. The water was poured slowly into another container. Some spilled onto the ground, darkening the dust. More people arrived as the sky brightened. They greeted each other with nods, not words. Morning voices were not yet ready. Children were rarely present this early. This was adult quiet. Hands repeated familiar motions. Lower, wait, lift. The well responded the same way every time. It did not care who came. It did not change its rhythm. As light grew, shadows shortened. Birds perched nearby, watching patiently. Sometimes they drank from small puddles left behind. The well area smelled faintly of damp stone and earth. It was comforting. Water was carried back to homes, some for cooking, some for washing, some simply to have nearby. Nothing dramatic happened at the well, and that was exactly why it mattered. Life depended on boring routines. Without water, nothing moved forward. Inside homes, fires were lit, bread dough was checked, faces were washed. The water that came from the well touched everything. It cooled hands, it filled cups, it cleaned tools. Later in the day, the well would grow louder, voices would rise, buckets would bump. But early morning belonged to slowness. Even animals respected it. Horses waited patiently, donkeys stood quietly. Chickens wandered nearby, unbothered. The sun now cleared the rooftops. Light reflected briefly off the surface of water inside buckets. It was never dazzling, just enough to notice. By mid-morning, most people were finished. The well stood mostly alone again. The rope rested, the bucket hung still. Water remained below, untouched, waiting. It did not hurry the next person. It had all the time in the world. As the day continued, life grew louder, but the well stayed the same. It had been there before this day. It would be there after. Generations passed through its quiet presence. Hands changed, buckets changed, the well did not. At night, the area returned to silence. Moonlight sometimes touched the stone edge. Stars reflected faintly in still water. The village slept, knowing the well would be there in the morning. Reliable, uninteresting, essential. And as someone drifted into sleep, the memory of water moving slowly upward from darkness lingered gently in the mind. Far from busy markets and crowded roads, medieval monasteries stood quietly. They were not built to impress. They were built to endure silence. Stone walls surrounded them, thick and heavy. Inside those walls, time moved differently, not faster, not slower, just evenly. Each day in a monastery followed the same rhythm. Morning began before sunrise. A bell rang softly through the darkness, not sharp, not urgent, just enough to wake sleeping monks. They rose slowly from narrow beds. No one rushed. Feet touched cold stone floors. Robes were adjusted calmly. The air inside the monastery was cool and still. Candles flickered gently as monks moved through corridors. Their footsteps echoed faintly, then faded. In the chapel, they sat in rows. No one spoke. Breathing was quiet. Thoughts settled. Prayers began in low, even voices. The words were familiar. They had been spoken thousands of times before. No one tried to say them louder or better. They were not performing. They were repeating. After prayers, the monks returned to simple tasks. Some copied manuscripts. Others worked in gardens. Some prepared meals. Each task was done slowly. Ink was dipped carefully. Letters were drawn one by one. Mistakes were not hurried away. Pages took days, sometimes weeks, to finish. Outside, the gardens waited patiently. Vegetables grew without supervision. Herbs bent slightly in the breeze. Monks worked the soil quietly. Hands moved dirt. Tools were lifted and placed down again. There was no conversation, only the sound of metal touching earth. Birds sometimes landed nearby. They were not chased away. Time passed unnoticed. When the sun rose higher, another bell rang, again soft. This meant it was time to eat. Meals were simple: bread, vegetables, water. Monks sat together but did not speak. One monk read from a book while the others ate. The voice was calm, steady, and unchanging. No one reacted. Eating was slow. No one hurried to finish. After the meal, work resumed. The same tasks, the same movements. Afternoon light entered through narrow windows. Dust floated lazily in the air. Some monks felt drowsy. That was normal. Rest was allowed. Short naps were taken on wooden benches or simple beds. The monastery never fully slept during the day. Someone was always awake, watching, listening, waiting. As evening approached, shadows lengthened. The air cooled again. Another bell, more prayers, the same words, the same tone. Dinner followed, even quieter than before. Darkness came early inside the stone walls. Candles replaced sunlight. Flickering light created soft shadows. Nothing dramatic happened, and that was the point. The monastery was not meant for excitement. It was meant to remove it. Night prayers were the final task. Voices were softer now. Some monks struggled to stay awake. Eyes closed briefly, then opened again. No one judged. After prayers, they returned to their beds. Wood creaked softly. Blankets were pulled close. Breathing slowed. Outside, the world continued, but inside the monastery, everything paused. The same day would repeat tomorrow, and the day after that, for years, for decades, for lifetimes. The stones remembered every footstep, every whispered prayer. But they did not tell stories. They simply stood. And as sleep came gently, the thought of a place where nothing urgent ever happened helped the mind let go. In medieval villages, afternoons were the quietest part of the day. The morning rush had already passed. Animals had been fed, fields had been checked, bread had been baked. By afternoon, most things were already done. The sun sat high in the sky, warm but not harsh. Shadows grew short. Villagers moved more slowly now. There was no reason to hurry. A farmer leaned against a wooden fence. He watched his sheep without really counting them. They grazed quietly, heads down, chewing slowly. A light breeze moved through tall grass. It carried the smell of earth and dry hay. Somewhere nearby, a dog slept in the shade. It did not lift its head when footsteps passed. In the center of the village, the road was nearly empty. It was made of packed dirt and small stones. Wagon wheels had pressed shallow lines into it over many years. Dust rested calmly. Nothing disturbed it. A woman sat outside her home with a basket in her lap. She repaired cloth with slow, careful movements. Thread passed through fabric again and again. Her hands knew the motion well. She did not rush. Time did not matter here. Inside nearby houses, the air was cool and dim. Small windows let in soft light. People rested on wooden benches. Some closed their eyes for a short while. Others stared at the ceiling beams, thinking of nothing in particular. The village well stood quietly. Its rope hung still. The bucket rested against stone. No one needed water right now. Even the birds seemed less active. They perched on rooftops and fences. Occasionally, one would flutter down, then return. No urgency, just movement. A blacksmith sat outside his workshop. His tools lay untouched. The forge was cold. Morning work had been enough. He wiped his hands on his apron and sighed gently. Not tired, just calm. Children, who had played loudly earlier, now sat quietly. Some leaned against walls, others traced shapes in the dirt with sticks. Their voices were soft. Laughter came and went quickly. It did not echo. In the fields beyond the village, crops stood still. Rows of plants waited patiently. They did not need attention right now. The sun did the work. Clouds moved slowly overhead. Their shadows drifted across the land. No one followed them. No one cared where they went. A cart stood near a barn. One wheel was slightly crooked. It had been that way for weeks. It would be fixed eventually, but not today. Today was for waiting. Inside the barn, animals rested. Cows lay on the ground, chewing slowly. Their tails flicked lazily. Flies buzzed softly. The sound blended into the warm air. Nothing broke the silence sharply. Church bells were quiet. They would ring later. For now, they rested too. Even the clock inside the tower seemed less important. Time did not press forward. It simply existed. An old man sat near the edge of the village. He leaned on a staff and watched the road. Very few travelers passed in the afternoon. When one did, they moved slowly. Dust rose gently beneath their feet. Greetings were short. Then silence returned. The afternoon stretched on, long and unbroken. Some villagers drifted into sleep without meaning to. Heads nodded, eyes closed, breathing slowed. Dreams came softly. They were not remembered. When someone woke, nothing had changed. The same sounds, the same light, the same stillness. As the sun began to lower, shadows lengthened again, slowly, almost unnoticed. The air cooled slightly. A bird called out, then stopped. People stirred gently, not because they had to, just because it felt right. The village remained calm, unchanged, and in that calm the mind could rest, just as it had for centuries. In medieval villages, evening arrived quietly. There was no sharp moment when day suddenly became night. Instead, light slowly softened. The sun lowered behind distant trees and hills. Shadows stretched across the ground, long and gentle. The village did not rush to notice. People simply adjusted. A farmer walked back from the fields with unhurried steps. His tools rested on his shoulder. They made a soft sound with each step. He did not count his pace. There was no need. Animals sensed evening before people did. Chickens returned to their coops. Their movements were slow and familiar. Cows shifted and settled inside barns. Horses lowered their heads and breathed deeply. The air carried a cooler feeling now, not cold, just calmer. In homes, small lamps were lit. Oil flickered inside simple holders. Candle flames wavered gently. Light touched walls unevenly. Shadows moved but did not distract. They were expected. A woman stirred a pot over a low fire. The meal was simple: grain, vegetables, nothing fancy. The smell filled the room slowly. It was comforting, not exciting. People ate without speaking much. Words were unnecessary. They had all day tomorrow to talk. Children grew quieter as evening settled. Their energy faded naturally. They leaned against parents or walls. Eyes grew heavy. Yawns came without warning. No one told them to sleep yet. It would happen on its own. Outside, the village road darkened. Dust settled completely. Footsteps sounded softer now. Most villagers stayed close to home. Travel at night was rare and unwanted. A dog lay near a doorway, half asleep. Its ears twitched at distant sounds, but it did not rise. Nothing felt threatening, just familiar. In the distance, the church bell rang once, slow, measured. It marked the evening hour, not sharply, just enough to be heard. People nodded to themselves. Yes, it was evening. Inside homes, wooden benches creaked gently. People sat with tired backs, hands rested in laps. Some repaired tools or clothing, others simply stared into the fire. Thoughts slowed, not because of effort, because of habit. Medieval evenings were not filled with plans. Tomorrow looked much like today. Fields, animals, food, rest. There was comfort in knowing that. A man stepped outside his home and looked up. The sky had changed color. Soft oranges and deep blues blended together. Stars were not visible yet, but they were coming, slowly, always on time. He breathed in, then out. The sound of his breath blended into the night. Nearby, a neighbor closed a wooden shutter. It made a dull sound, not loud, just final. Another shutter followed, one by one. The village tucked itself in. In barns, hay smelled warm and dry. Animals shifted and settled. Their breathing was steady, repetitive, almost hypnotic. Crickets began their quiet rhythm, not loud, not demanding, just present. In one house, an old couple sat side by side. They had said everything already. They did not need to speak. The fire crackled softly. A log shifted. Ash fell inward. Time passed without being noticed. Some villagers stretched out on simple beds. Straw-filled mattresses rested low to the ground. Blankets were rough, but familiar. Bodies sank into rest easily. Muscles loosened. Breathing slowed. Outside, the moon rose slowly. No one watched it closely. It did not need attention. It would rise whether anyone noticed or not. A traveler passed far from the village. His footsteps were distant, faint, soon gone. The village remained undisturbed. Even thoughts began to fade. People no longer replayed the day. They no longer planned the next. Sleep arrived gently, not forced, not rushed, just accepted. The lamps burned lower, flames grew smaller, shadows softened, darkness filled corners quietly. Nothing dramatic happened, and that was exactly how evenings were meant to be. Calm, predictable, safe. As the medieval village rested, so could the mind, letting go, breathing slowly, drifting, with nothing important left to do. In medieval times, night changed everything. Day belonged to work, night belonged to stillness. When darkness fully settled over the village, movement became rare. Doors stayed closed, fires burned low, the world grew smaller. Inside homes, most people were already asleep. Breathing filled the rooms softly, slow, uneven, natural. A child shifted on a straw mattress, then settled again. An arm fell loosely across a blanket. No dreams yet, just rest. Outside, the air felt cooler and heavier. The ground no longer held warmth. Dew began to form on grass and wooden fences. Roofs glistened faintly under moonlight. Not bright, just enough to see shapes. A narrow path wound through the village, empty, silent, no carts, no voices, only the quiet presence of night. In the distance, an owl called once, then again. Its sound echoed briefly before fading. No one reacted. Owls were part of the night, always had been. A single lantern moved slowly near the edge of the village. It belonged to the night watchman. He walked without hurry. His job was not to chase trouble, only to notice it. Most nights nothing happened, and he preferred it that way. His footsteps were careful, measured. The lantern swayed slightly with each step. Light danced across stone and dirt, then disappeared again. The watchman paused near a wooden gate. He listened. Nothing. Only the soft sound of wind moving through trees. He continued on. Time passed differently at night. Minutes felt longer. Hours stretched. There was no rush to count them. In one small house, a candle burned almost completely down. Wax pooled at the base. The flame flickered, then went out. Smoke curled upwards slowly. The room grew darker. No one woke. Sleep remained undisturbed. Farther away, fields rested under the open sky. Crops stood quietly. No movement, no work, just waiting. They would greet the sun again in the morning, but not yet. Above, stars filled the sky. More stars than people ever counted. They did not twinkle brightly. They simply existed, steady, unconcerned. A medieval villager might glance up if awake, but most were not. Stars were familiar. They appeared every night. There was nothing special to notice. In barns, animals slept standing or lying down. A horse shifted its weight, then grew still again. A cow exhaled deeply, warm breath rising into cool air. Life slowed everywhere. In one home, an elderly man lay awake briefly, not worried, just aware. He listened to the quiet. He had lived many nights like this. They all blended together. Soon his thoughts softened. Sleep took him again. The watchman reached the center of the village. He stopped, raised his lantern slightly, looked around. Houses stood dark and peaceful. Windows showed no light, no movement. Everything was as it should be. He nodded to himself, lowered the lantern, moved on. Beyond the village, a narrow road stretched into darkness. No one traveled now. Night belonged to rest. Travelers waited for daylight. Safety lived in stillness. A light breeze moved through tall grass. It made a soft, brushing sound, repetitive, calming, almost like breathing. The village well stood unused. Its rope hung motionless. The bucket rested against stone. No hands reached for it until morning. Time continued passing, unnoticed. The moon climbed higher, then slowly began to drift. No one marked the hour. There were no clocks, only instinct. Sleep deepened. Dreams began quietly. Not vivid, just fragments, feelings, impressions. A sense of warmth, of familiarity, of being safe. Somewhere, a dog lifted its head briefly, listened, then laid it back down. Nothing demanded attention. In medieval nights, silence was not empty, it was full. Full of rest, full of patience, full of waiting. The world did not push forward, it paused, breathing together. Homes, fields, animals, people, all resting under the same dark sky. As the night stretched on, even the watchman grew tired. He leaned briefly against a wall, lantern steady, eyes heavy, then straightened, continued his slow path. Soon his shift would end. Another quiet night completed. No stories to tell, no events to remember. And that was the best kind of night. As this medieval night continues, your own thoughts can slow. There is nothing important happening now, nothing you need to follow. You can rest. Let the night hold you, just as it held the village, calm, still, unchanging. In medieval times, morning did not arrive suddenly. It came slowly, very slowly. Long before the sun appeared, the village was still asleep. The sky was not dark anymore, but not bright either. A soft grey covered everything. Houses rested quietly. Roofs held a thin layer of cool moisture. Wooden doors stayed closed. No one rushed to open them. Inside homes, breathing was deep and steady. Blankets rose and fell gently. People remained wrapped in sleep. Outside, the air felt heavy and calm. Not cold, not warm, just still. Fields beyond the village lay silent. Tall grass bent slightly under the weight of dew. Every blade held a tiny drop of water. They did not move. They waited. Somewhere far away, a bird called once, then stopped. Another answered faintly. Morning was testing its voice, but not yet speaking fully. In one small house near the edge of the village, a fire pit sat empty. Ashes from the night before lay undisturbed. No hands reached for kindling yet. There was no urgency. Time moved differently here. An old wooden table stood near a window. Light barely touched its surface. Shadows remained long and soft. The room smelled faintly of smoke and straw. A child shifted slightly in sleep, turned toward warmth, then grew still again. Dreams lingered gently, not sharp, not loud, just feelings drifting. Outside, the narrow path through the village remained empty. Footprints from yesterday were still visible. Nothing had crossed them yet. The well stood quiet. The rope hung loose. No bucket moved. Morning had not asked for water yet. A rooster stood silently near a fence. It did not crow, not yet. It waited. Animals sensed the change before people did. A cow shifted in a barn, exhaled deeply. A horse flicked its ear once, then rested again. No one stirred. Above, clouds moved slowly. They softened the coming light. No sudden brightness, just a gentle easing of night. The watchman's lantern was gone now. His shift had ended long ago. The village trusted daylight to return on its own. In a stone house near the center, an elderly woman lay awake briefly. Her eyes opened. She listened. Nothing sounded different. She closed them again. Sleep returned easily. Morning did not demand attention. It allowed rest to continue. The sky lightened another shade. Grey turned softer. Edges of buildings became clearer. Still no movement, no voices, no footsteps. Medieval mornings were patient, very patient. There were no alarms, no schedules written down. People woke when their bodies decided, or when light became strong enough. But that moment had not arrived. A light breeze moved through the village. It carried the smell of damp earth, of wood, of old stone. The breeze did not hurry. It passed gently between houses, then faded. In the fields, mist clung close to the ground. It moved slowly, barely noticeable, like breath hovering. The world felt suspended, neither night nor day, just in between. In one home, a man turned slightly on his mattress. He murmured something unintelligible, then relaxed again. His face smoothed. Sleep deepened. No dream pulled him awake. A cat curled tighter near a doorway, its tail wrapped neatly around its body. Warmth mattered more than time. Somewhere, a distant bell rope hung untouched. Church bells would ring later, much later, not now. Now was for quiet. The sky shifted again. A pale hint of color appeared, very faint, almost unnoticeable. Still the village remained asleep. No one looked up to see it. Morning did not need an audience. It arrived regardless. A wooden shutter creaked softly as temperature changed. The sound was gentle. It did not wake anyone. Just a small reminder that the world was still there, waiting. In barns, hay smelled sweet and dry. Animals breathed steadily. Their bodies rose and fell. Nothing startled them. Everything felt familiar, safe, routine. The path leading out of the village remained empty. No travelers yet, no carts, no horses. Travel began after full light, not during this quiet moment. Time stretched, moments blended together. No clear beginning, no clear end, just a long, slow transition. In one house, a candle stub sat cold and hard, used up, no flame, no smoke. The night had fully passed, but morning had not claimed the space yet. The sky brightened slightly more. Mist began to thin, just a little. Shapes grew clearer, edges sharpened gently. Still no movement. The village rested. People rested. Even thoughts rested. This was the calmest part of the day, before work, before sound, before responsibility. In medieval life, these moments belonged to no one. They were not productive. They were not planned. They simply existed, and that was enough. A bird hopped along a fence, paused, then flew off. No song followed, just motion, quiet motion. Somewhere, a wooden door shifted slightly in its frame. Still closed, still quiet. No one inside noticed. The sky continued its slow change. Grey lifted, light grew warmer, but gently, always gently. In one home, a young woman stretched her fingers slightly, not waking, just moving in sleep. Her breathing stayed deep. Her body relaxed again. Morning waited patiently. The village remained unchanged. Houses, paths, fields, all still, all calm. The first hint of true daylight touched the tops of trees, not the ground, just the highest leaves. They caught the light softly, no sudden brightness, no glare, just a suggestion of warmth. Still no one rose. There was no need to rush. Medieval mornings unfolded slowly like a long breath. As this quiet morning continues, you can let your own body soften. There is nothing you need to follow, nothing important happening, just time passing gently, just rest, just stillness. Let the village stay asleep. Let your thoughts fade. Morning will come when it comes. There is no hurry. There was no single moment when the village woke up. It happened little by little, so slowly that no one noticed it happening. Light had finally reached the ground. Not bright light, just enough to soften the shadows. The sky above the village looked pale and quiet. Clouds rested without shape or urgency. They drifted slowly, almost lazily. Inside the houses, sleep began to loosen its hold. Not suddenly, not fully, just slightly. In one home near the center of the village, a man opened his eyes. He did not sit up. He did not move. He simply looked at the ceiling. Wooden beams crossed above him. He had seen them every morning of his life. There was nothing new there. His breathing stayed slow. He closed his eyes again. Another few moments of rest. In a nearby house, someone coughed softly. Then silence returned. No conversation followed, no movement. Just the sound fading into stillness. The village did not wake together. Each person rose at their own quiet pace. A woman turned onto her side, pulled a blanket closer. The morning air felt cool, comforting. She stayed still. Outside, the mist had thinned further. It hovered close to the ground now, slowly pulling back toward the fields. The path through the village appeared clearer, still empty, still untouched. A rooster finally lifted its head. It did not crow loudly, just a low sound. Then it stopped, as if unsure whether it was time. A dog shifted near a doorway, stretched one leg, then another. It yawned widely and lay back down. Morning did not demand activity, it suggested it, gently. The well stood waiting, wooden sides darkened by age and moisture. The bucket still hung in place. No hands reached for it yet. Water would come later. There was no thirst strong enough yet. In one house, a child opened their eyes, looked toward the door. Light slipped under it, a pale line on the floor. The child watched it for a moment, then turned away. Sleep returned easily. There was no reason to get up, not yet. The smell of damp earth drifted through the village, mixed with old wood and stone, familiar, comforting, nothing sharp, nothing new. A wooden shutter opened slightly somewhere, just a crack. Light entered the room, a face appeared briefly. Then the shutter closed again. The person inside needed a few more moments. Time was generous. In medieval villages, mornings belonged to no one. There were tasks, yes, but not yet. This moment was for waking slowly, for letting the body decide. A cow lowed softly in a barn, a deep, calm sound. It echoed faintly, then faded. No one rushed to respond. The animals were used to waiting, So were the people. Footsteps finally appeared, one pair, slow, measured. A man walked along the path, barely lifting his feet. He stopped, looked at the sky, rubbed his hands together for warmth, then continued. No one greeted him, not because they were unfriendly, but because no one else was out yet. Silence remained comfortable. In another house, a woman sat up. She moved carefully, as if not to disturb the quiet. She placed her feet on the floor. The wood felt cool. She stayed seated for a moment, breathing, listening. There was no rush to stand. Morning would wait. A kettle sat near the fire pit, empty, cold. Soon it would be filled. Soon a fire would burn, but not yet. The moment before work held a special calm, one that disappeared quickly once broken. The sky brightened just a little more, still soft, still muted, no harsh edges. Light slid across walls, touched doorways, reached into narrow spaces. The village looked the same, just clearer. A second rooster crowed, this one louder, more confident. It lasted a few seconds, then stopped. The sound carried across rooftops, into fields, into barns. Some people stirred, some did not. Morning sounds layered slowly, never all at once. A cartwheel creaked faintly somewhere, then went quiet again. Someone adjusted a rope. Metal touched wood softly. No clatter, no sharp noise. In one home, a man finally stood. He stretched slowly. His joints creaked. He smiled faintly. Another day, nothing special, nothing different. That was comforting. He moved toward the door, opened it carefully. Cool air entered. He paused, looked out at the village. Still quiet, still calm. He stepped outside, closed the door behind him. Gently, a woman nearby swept the floor just inside her doorway. The broom moved slowly. Dust rose briefly, then settled. She stopped, rested the broom against the wall. She would finish later. No one expected speed. In the distance, a bell rope swayed slightly. But no bell rang yet. Church time came later. This hour belonged to quiet personal routines, to waking slowly, to easing into the day. A bird finally sang, a short song, clear. Then silence returned. The sound felt gentle, like a reminder. Morning was here, but it did not need attention. The village began to breathe differently, still calm, but awake enough to notice itself. If you are listening, you can let your thoughts slow here. There is no story to follow closely, no detail you must remember, just the rhythm of a village waking gently, just the sound of words passing by, like footsteps on a quiet path. Nothing important happening, no urgency, no pressure, just time, just rest, just calm. By the time the sun rose a little higher, the village was no longer asleep. But it was not busy either. It rested in a calm space between rest and work. A moment that felt slow, gentle, unimportant. Light touched the roofs more clearly now, still soft, still pale. Shadows shortened slightly, but did not disappear. The air remained cool, comfortable. In one house, a small fire was lit. The flame was quiet. It did not crackle loudly, it simply burned. A kettle was placed near it, not directly on the flame, just close enough. Water would warm slowly. No one wanted it to boil quickly. The woman who lit the fire sat nearby. She rested her hands in her lap, watched the flame, thought of nothing in particular. Morning thoughts were never urgent. Outside, another door opened. A man stepped out holding a wooden bowl. Inside it was simple grain, dry, plain. He carried it to the animals, walking slowly, stopping once to stretch his back. The animals waited calmly. They were used to patience. A child sat on a bench near a wall, feet dangling, not touching the ground. They swung slightly, back and forth, no rhythm, just movement. The child watched dust float in the light. Tiny particles, drifting, settling. Nothing else held their attention. Across the village, the well finally saw use. A rope creaked softly. The bucket descended. Water echoed faintly below. Then the rope moved again, slowly rising. The bucket emerged, dripping quietly. Water spilled back into the well. No one hurried. Spilling did not matter. A woman poured the water into another container, set it down. She wiped her hands on her apron, stood still for a moment, listening. Morning sounds had grown, but they were still gentle. Footsteps, soft voices, wood touching wood, nothing sharp, nothing loud, no laughter yet, no arguments, just presence. A man leaned against a wall, chewed a small piece of bread, stale but filling. He ate, slowly, looking nowhere in particular. Bread tasted the same every day, that was expected. Nearby, someone stirred a pot, thin soup, barely more than warm water and herbs. Steam rose faintly. The smell was mild, familiar, comforting. No spices strong enough to wake the senses fully. This meal was meant to support the day, not excite it. The village square remained mostly empty. A cart stood near the edge, unloaded, waiting. Its owner would return later. For now, it rested, just like everyone else. A bell rang once, not loudly, not insistently, just enough to mark time. No one rushed toward it. Everyone already knew where they were meant to be. Eventually. A woman adjusted her shawl, pulled it closer. The morning chill lingered. She stood in the doorway, watched the path. Someone passed. They nodded. No words were exchanged. Words were not needed yet. A cat crossed the path, stopped, sat, licked its paw, then moved on, unbothered, unhurried. The sky had turned a pale blue. Clouds thinned, light spread evenly. There were no dramatic changes, only gradual ones. That was how mornings worked here. Inside another home, someone swept the floor. The broom moved steadily, side to side, side to side. The sound was soft, almost soothing. Dust rose, then settled again. The person stopped halfway, leaned on the broom, rested. There was time to finish later. A man checked his tools, laid them out, touched each one. Hammer, knife, rope. Everything was where it should be. He nodded to himself, satisfied. He did not begin work yet. Preparation was enough for now. In the fields beyond the village, the mist had nearly vanished. Grass bent slightly in the breeze. Dew clung to blades, sparkled faintly, then disappeared as light warmed them. A farmer stood at the edge of the field, looked out, did not step forward yet. He took a breath, another, then waited. The village had fully woken, but it remained quiet, calm, predictable. If you are listening to this, you do not need to imagine every detail clearly. You can let the words drift. Like morning sounds through open doors, nothing important is happening. Nothing needs attention. Each sentence can fade as soon as it arrives. Your mind can rest here, in this ordinary place, in this slow morning where time moves gently and nothing asks anything from you.